Hi, I'm Frank Biaggi, and I'm here with my good friend Richard Paris. Richard, are you on board today?
Yes, I am. Let us proceed.
I just always am happy when you come on board because we have such wonderful discussions, and we have this in common that we love to read books. And this is a good one. This is one that Richard picked. It's called The Drama of a Gifted Child by Alice Miller. And it was a bestseller back in the early 80s, I
Yeah,
think.
1980s is when it was first published.
Yeah. So anyway, but Richard, you picked it.
I
You apparently like it for a number of reasons. So can you just share with us what you like about this book?
okay. I've heard about Alice Miller for some time. I've come across her name and have her, and she's been referenced as somebody who really was fully inside of and very coherently explained the trauma of childhood, which is actually remarkably prevalent throughout the world, more than is normally acknowledged. So I'd never actually read one of her books, though I was familiar with the name. So this is the first time I've ever actually read one of her books, and it was very compelling. She's like a genius uh, in terms of somebody who's willing to fully embrace the kind of pain and trauma that children often feel, which is generally ignored or bypassed or pretended not to exist. Because most adults grow up fairly well adapted and they sort of get along. But so often underneath, there's all this tremendous pain, or it's been called like primal pain. That's hard to describe because as adults, you normally look at everything through your thoughts and your cognition. You don't really appreciate what it was like as a vulnerable, unguarded, undefended little creature, and how impactful it was and how much it hurt and how much the results have affected your entire life. So most people, including psychologists or therapists, aren't really inside of the actual pain of what it was like for most children. So their theories are based often on their ideas, and they might be very brilliant, but they won't fully grok how what a tremendous impact how we treat children, how it has on everything, how people are, how societies function, even how countries operate, the inherent sense that you're in danger and need to protect yourself, and all kinds of issues. So she's almost one of the first people I've ever come across who truly understood what it was like from a child or an infant's viewpoint. I mean, there was this famous therapy called primal therapy, which sort of touched on this stuff, but he was sort of a celebrity seeker. This is somebody who's actually, in a certain way, lived it and has delved deeply into the reality of it, and is willing to had has then surfaced and communicated it to us, most of whom aren't really that conversant in the language of childhood trauma. So I was very impressed with her book. I mean, yeah, there were times where I thought it was overly wordy and she kept repeating similar themes, but I thought it was really important that she even do that to emphasize over and over how much we're affected by childhood and how the effects are often much deeper than we're willing to admit or acknowledge inside of ourselves. So I'm really glad to have read the book, and I'm glad Frank is so amenable to delving into strange new topics. So that's my initial comments, as it were.
Well, I did really enjoy the book. I felt it went beyond being overly wordy. When I started to read it, it was almost a little disturbing. And I understand she went through, well, I didn't know who she was. I just started reading the book. And when I started reading the book, I thought it went a little beyond being a little overly wordy. I mean, it was almost disturbing. And I kind of the first chapter, I made it through it. 2 pages. I think there was about, I don't even know. I could show you on the screen. There's like 80 instances of just, I call it the book of horror, the book of horrors. And and I went, wow, and then I got to chapter 3. She goes, I was out for a walk and I noticed a young couple a few steps ahead, both tall. They had a little boy with them. And then she goes on about, it was there at an ice cream parlor. And so
Yeah.
she goes on, and then she goes, two giants, unfair situation, two big, strong adults stand there laughing at this child. This is her. She says over here, we're accustomed to seeing such situations from the adult point of view, but here I want to describe it as experience from a child. And I read this thing and I'm going, okay, well, they went to the ice cream parlor, so they went for the child. And then the child wanted an ice cream cone. And then she says, these two big, strong adults, and they stand there laughing at the child, lack of empathy. And then she goes, and will that little person not take the next opportunity to pass these feelings on to a still small child? And I thought, this is just parents taking a child into an ice cream parlor. And I thought, now that's a little bit of, I wouldn't call it overreacting. I was thinking it was misrepresentative of what the occasion was. So I thought, is there something with her? Like, is there something maybe mentally going on there? What did you think of that story?
I thought it was a good example of what she was saying. First of all, in this particular example with the ice cream cone, what kind of happened is that the little boy was frantic to be able to hold the ice cream bar, while the parents just gave him one bite to nibble on, but he really wanted to be able to hold it, and he was very focused on it. And what she was commenting on is that they weren't willing to work with him to satisfy his need, no matter how trivial it might seem to adults. To him, it was a big deal. In that moment, that was his whole world. He just wanted to be able to hold this scrumptious thing that tasted good and that his parents were enthralled with. So they really weren't willing to go into his world and how it was for him and how much it meant to him. So they kind of negated his need, gave him a little nibble, but really wouldn't give him what he wanted. And then when he was really carrying on and very upset and traumatized by it all, I mean, he was frustrated and angry and felt like he was being abandoned. They really weren't responding to him. But then they kind of laughed that he was making such a big deal over such a small thing. But in his world, it wasn't a little thing. That was her point. From the child's world, this was a really big thing. It's like for an adult getting divorced or something, which is a big deal. For him, it was a big deal. And that they didn't really give him any respect in terms of this is for him, it mattered. And so they needed to somehow come to some kind of detente with him or some negotiated peace where they could give him something or handle the ice cream in some way or hold it for him or eat most of it and give him the stick to hold that has some ice cream on it. They didn't come up with any kind of resolution that would satisfy him. So he was left traumatized. That was her point. Obviously, this isn't an extreme sample of a child being beat up, but it's more like the everyday stuff that happens. And she's trying to explain how much this can affect him. And obviously, it would probably take more than one incident for it to become a lifelong pattern. But the sense of being frustrated and misunderstood and angry. And then her point is that as the little child is angry, he can't really express it because he needs these people and he can't alienate them. So he has to adapt to them and change who he is so that he keeps them happy so that they'll take care of him. That's what I want to say about that, Frank.
Well, I think you did a good job saying it, but it still doesn't take away that I thought it was kind of a weird interpretation of parents taking a child to an ice cream parlor, because obviously they were giving him ice cream, and she interpreted it as something that was, I thought a little concerning. So I'm going to share my screen again. So I looked her up, and I saw. Have you seen this movie, Who's Afraid of Alice Miller?
No, is that her? I
Oh,
don't know
that's
what
her.
she looks like.
That's her. So this her son. So her son's name is Martin Miller. So after she died, he came out and said, Although Martin was born in the safety of Switzerland in 1950, the abyss of the Holocaust continues to wreak havoc with him today. Alice Miller perceived her son as a Nazi persecutor. And
Yeah,
in
who
his,
wrote this? Who wrote this?
her son. So she died, okay, when she was, I think I have the obituary here. The drama, it was, she would died in, when she was 87 years old in 2010. So then he came out with his book. Now, remember, when this book came out, no one knew this stuff that I'm going to show you right now. Okay, so anyway, he said that indeed, I show in the book that her relationships with her son, Alice Miller, did the very opposite of what she wrote. If I hadn't been familiar with her theory, I would be dead today. Oh, it gets better. Her husband, they had a sadomasochistic relationship, and I helped my mother by becoming my father's victim in her place. I have to read this because this is so crazy. On one of the few occasions when she shared her wartime experiences with her son, she spoke about a Gestapo man who exploited her apparently sexually as well. She said, "You know, your father has the same name as that man from the Gestapo," he recalls. "My parents' marriage was like the relations between the Gestapo man and my mother. You can imagine how my mother felt about my father. She hated him and thought he was an idiot, which he in fact was. My father became so frustrated that he started to torture me. He humiliated me because I was connected to my mother. I helped her in the sense that my father hit me and not her. I was his object for beating. He beat me brutally. He took advantage of every opportunity to abuse me, including sexual abuse. For years, he forced me to bathe with him every morning. Sometimes I would try to stay in bed so he would shower without me, but he would come to my room and say I was a lazy pig and tell me to get up and come to the shower." Oh, it gets better. "My mother never intervened. He beat me and she did not intervene. She wrote against sexual harassment. She wrote that all parents are criminals when they hit their children, but she did not intervene. She suffered from disassociation," he explains, "from the ability to see herself in the theories that she propounded." So I knew it. I started to read this book. I can show you the first 2 pages. I said, this woman's disturbed. I could tell it. She's mentally disturbed. And I think what happened, and I mean, great, she's a Holocaust survivor. She was raped by Nazis. She had to hide her identity. She just had, I guess it came out later, you know, she kept all this hidden. So what she did is she wrote this book, and the book is really about her. I mean, she was abused, and then she did the terrible things that she told people that parents did to children. No, she did it to children. She was doing it to children. And my feeling about this book, Richard, is that back when it came out, no one dared to say what I just showed you, because number one, they didn't know it because she kept it hidden. Her own son didn't come out and tell it. They asked him, you can YouTube it, it's an interview. They asked him, why didn't you put this book out when she was alive? And he said, because she would have denied it and she would have sued me. She was mentally disturbed. And I'm telling you, everything in this book about how nasty parents are, she was that person. So I'm not saying the book doesn't have substance and a meaning, but all I'm telling you is this. The reason this book became a #1 bestseller is because no one knew about her and her mental disturbances. And if they had have known it, this book would have gone nowhere.
So she herself, I don't know anything about her background. So she herself was in a concentration camp.
I don't know about a concentration camp. She was there when the Nazis occupied Germany, and she was a Jew. And so she had to hide her identity, and then they had to escape, and she was sexually assaulted by Nazis. It was horrible. And then when her therapist apparently that she had over the years. He couldn't say anything about it because he was her therapist.
Confidentiality, yeah,
But
confidentiality.
then after she died, she had given him permission to release not that agreement. And so then he explained that she had this disassociation. She she could not accept the reality of her childhood. She was doing exactly what she was writing about in this book.
Oh my God.
Can you believe that?
No. Wow.
And Richard, I saw I have a
You have a
I can kind
sense.
of
Yeah.
perceive, I kind of have the sense, and I started reading the book, and I just think the most of you. You're the neatest guy, and you're so smart. And I started to read it, and I thought, oh boy, there's something wrong with this lady, because she just, like I said, it was beyond what did you say, the terms that you used, repetition or whatever, it was just like, it was not normal how she
You're
was expressing herself.
you're saying that it was extreme based on her own avoidance of herself. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think she had mental illness, and when she wrote this book, like, let's say there was somebody else that read it like I did, and back then I would not have dared have said anything like what I just told you, because I couldn't prove it. Number one, nobody knew about it.
Right.
And plus, here's a Holocaust survivor. So if you suspected it, you wouldn't dare say anything. But now, after she died and her son came out with the book, and we can see that this was reality, that she had a mental illness. And now I think this book, we need to look at it in a little bit of a different light.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
It almost, I think we need to read it and go, we need to understand that this book was written by a very disturbed person. And let's look at I'm going to just show you the first couple pages. I mean, when I first started reading it, I just went, man, Richard's a great guy, but this is tough.
Why did he pick this book? That's what you're thinking.
Yeah, I thought, why did you pick this book? The first chapter, come on.
Well, good luck.
So the very first page, she goes, in a struggle against mental illness, from unique history of our childhood. And then the next 2 pages, she goes on, and I mean, I had such a hard time getting through it, because it wouldn't stop. It's like repressed childhood, repression, brutal abuse, physically attacking, torture once inflicted, self-scourging clubs, sadomasochistic practices, piercing their nipples, pose for newspaper photographs, sexually exploited by her father. And just in 2 pages, she put enough stuff. It was like an atomic bomb of horrors. And I thought, wow, that's what first tipped me off. As I said, something's bothering this lady. And yeah, I did. I said, why would Richard pick this book? It's like he's trying to torture me. Maybe he's trying to get even with me or something.
Yeah, it's revenge. No, this was no, it's like I said, when I first spoke, I had heard a lot about her in very positive tones, and I had never read any book by her. And someone had recommended it to me, and I said, yeah, let's pick that book. I want to read her, at least read one of her books. I had never read her before.
Well, Richard, here's the thing. I mean, this was a bestseller. I mean, I saw people that have interviewed her son, and they say, oh, this book changed my life, because let's face it, there are a lot of people that are abused by their parents. Like she says in the book, there's parents that have mental illnesses and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So these children, and like you said in the opening, they're kind of not listened to or maybe ignored. And when they read a book like this, the overall theme is I can relate to this.
Mhm.
So they gravitate to it. The problem I'm having with it is not them. Okay, I don't have a problem with children that are really legitimately abused by their parents. What I have a problem with is somebody who's severely mentally disturbed that writes a book. I think that it needs to be looked at in a different light.
So after you read the book, Frank, you did some research, and that's where you found this material, like from her son.
I didn't even make it through the whole book. I couldn't handle it. I mean, I'm pretty perceptive on things, and I started seeing it and I said, I don't think this person is I think they have some problems because I thought that her viewpoints on certain things seemed to be distorted. Normally, I'll give you an example. The thing about the child in the ice cream cone, I ran this by one of my very close friends when I read it, because I thought, what do you think of this? And they said, well, normally parents really care about their kids. Most parents really love their children and they take them to ice cream parlors and stuff. So I'm not going to say that some don't and the children experience problems, but for the most part, I mean, she saw parents taking this child in there, and most parents don't take a child to an ice cream parlor unless they're doing it for the child. You know, why would they be eating ice cream for themselves? They'd be going and getting a pizza or something. So I just thought that
Well,
and I can't prove that or not. I mean, I wasn't there. I didn't see these
mhm,
parents, and I don't know what it was, but I'm just saying
mhm.
that if she was living a double life, okay, in denial, and she wasn't who she appeared to be, and she was doing these horrible abusive things to her husband and her child,
Well,
when
wait.
she
Her
writes
her
this book.
child blamed the father, not the mother,
No, he blamed her too.
for not intervening.
No, also for being abusive to him too. That was
Oh,
just
that
one
that
incident.
she
Yeah,
was abusive.
yeah, she was abusive. She uh looked at him like he was the Nazi prison guard, and that's what he said in that
Her
movie.
son looked at her
Person,
son that way.
yeah. So and plus, I mean, he was afraid to talk to her about reality because he knew she would deny it. She lived a reclusive life, and then when she died, here, let me just share one more thing about the end of her life, which again, it's just so abnormal. She chose the date of her death, not having anything to fate. With cancer, she decided to kill herself. She called her son and said, I'm going to die this afternoon. A few hours later, she was dead. She also destroyed all the letters and everything that was on the computer. She left no traces. To whom did she leave the inheritance? We don't know. When she died, there was simply no money, and we don't know where it went. She made tens of millions from her books, and nothing remained. That's not a normal person.
Hmm. Wow. I'm blindsided, Frank.
I was
I had
too.
no clue.
It didn't surprise me when I researched her and I saw it. I didn't surprise me, but wouldn't it have been great if this stuff could have been, people would have known about this back when she first published her first book, which was this book.
Was this the first one?
Yeah,
I don't know.
this
Yeah.
was her first book, and she just rode this thing out. I mean, she stopped her psychiatric practice. I think she's a psychotherapist. She stopped that practice and she just rode the profits of her book out, and she lived a life of denial. She denied these things happened to her. She denied she was doing anything like this. She wouldn't even admit it to her son. He lived in fear. And I think, she wrote the book a lot about herself, and I think a lot of people gravitated to it, but I think that there's a lot of things in this book that are damaging. I think she went over the line on a lot of things. It was very disturbing for me to read it.
Yeah, you kind of set me up here, Frank.
I
You had
didn't.
the
No, no,
you
no.
you had this whole thing. No, it's okay. I don't mean it in a bad way. Actually, it's kind of a good tactic in a way, as to some an attorney. But no, you had me sing your praises, and then you came in with, "There's no way you're going to be able to maintain that when you hear this."
Richard, I
You know
wanted
what I
to
mean?
be
Yeah, yeah,
fair, and I wanted to know why you picked the book. I had no idea, and you were
yeah,
honest. And listen, Richard,
yeah,
you're a nice person. You read the book. You
yeah.
trusted that she was a legitimate author. I'll tell you what I would suggest. Whenever I read a book in the future, I'm going to research the author before I read it.
That's probably a good idea. I know it seems irrelevant now, but I just wanted to comment on the ice cream parlor example. Whatever was true or not true about her, I think her point was that even these relatively benign parents in a relatively trivial situation could be acting in a way that could adversely affect their child. Even if she's a total fake, I mean Alice Miller, and she was a total monster, I still think I found stuff in the book valuable, no matter who she was or what she was. So I
I
just want to
I
say
I
that.
agree, Richard, and I
Yeah.
would say that if those parents really were as monstrous as what she described, I would agree. It's just that I have a hard time believing anything that she wrote because
I see. Well,
that's my problem.
you think she might have even made it up or something?
I think she was mentally ill, and I think she just imagined things that weren't real. Like I said, I mean, the parents took the child to an ice cream parlor. I can't imagine that they were the monsters that she made them
No,
out to
no,
be.
no, but I was saying she wasn't saying they were monsters. She was saying they were relatively benign. He even spoke to their son in a very nice way, but that their reaction of not taking him seriously was humiliating for the child and very frustrating and traumatic. That's all.
I mean,
That's
if
all
they
it's about.
really were and they talked to their child that way, I would say yes. It's just that I am skeptical about her interpretation of anything after seeing what she did to her son and her husband and everything else. But I'm with you. I agree. I think that there are good things, and I feel people that have been abused like that, it's horrible. But I just think this book might not be the book to throw her a hat on.
I understand, Frank. I understand.
I'd like to wrap this one up, and then it's my turn to pick the next book, right,
It
Richard?
is. It is. I agree. I have a hunch you're not going to pick a therapy book.
I don't know. I've got some in mind, but
Okay.
I'm gonna, I'm gonna give it some thought, and you're gonna have to give me a day or so to come up with
Yeah,
one. I have about two or three of them I have in mind, but
that's fine. You take
okay.
whatever.
Until next time, Richard. Hey, take care.
Take care.
All right.
Bye, Frank.